Huge thank you to Proofreading Aid for sponsoring this video. Exactly 1 week from today, I'm publishing Underground Royalty, which is the sequel to this book right here, and this video is going to break down the 5 steps I went through to ensure it was publication ready. The very first thing that I did after finishing the first draft was to take a break from Underground Royalty. I usually do this with all of my books before entering the editing phase so that I can come back to it with a clearer head. Then, after my break, I did a complete read-through of the draft without allowing myself to make any changes because I want to have a clear understanding of what I'm working with before I start poking and prodding at it and making changes that I might regret later. I read through the entire draft and made 2 lists. The first was for definite changes, which I knew I was absolutely going to make, and then the second were for possible changes, which is more of an idea list of things that might be fun to incorporate or change down the line, but right now I'm not really sure. Once I finished the full read-through, I finally allowed myself to make changes, starting with the definite changes list, and I made those edits one by one. After that, I approached my possible changes list and decided which ones I was going to scrap and which ones I would implement, and then I made those next. At this point, I was done with the second draft, and with a bit of miscellaneous editing, it was ready for beta readers. Normally, I write everything in Scrivener, but for collaborative processes like the beta reading campaigns, I transfer everything to a Google Doc. So I moved everything there, made sure that it was shareable and everyone could view it and comment, and I sent that link to all of my beta readers. Their role in the editing process was to read an early draft of my book and provide constructive criticism that would help me shape the final version. They left comments on the Google Doc in real time, but the most important thing was that they filled out a survey at the end after reading the full book, which asked them questions about the plot, the pacing, and the characters. Once I had all of their feedback, I took an entire day to analyze the data, and I put together a list of problems and solutions. Pause right here to see an example that I pulled from my notes as to what one of those problems and solutions looks like. Once I finished compiling my list, I addressed each problem one by one to complete my third draft. At this point, I had already made all of my big plot-related changes, so the story was pretty set in stone. My next step was to enter the copy editing process. I've actually worked as a freelance copy editor in the past, and I've noticed that a lot of clients would hire me too early. To get the most out of the copy editing stage, it's really important that your book is as polished as it can be. That way your editor is not just fixing mistakes, but actually helping you take your writing beyond your current ability. I also apply this philosophy to my own work, so that's why I took an extra step to really hone in the writing itself with a focused chapter-by-chapter edit. With one of my past books, I tried using Grammarly to help me with this polishing process, but it's definitely geared more toward business writing and nonfiction, so I haven't used it again. However, I recently discovered Proofreading Aid, and it's exactly what I've been missing. Proofreading Aid is made specifically for fiction, and it works in all of your favorite writing apps like Google Docs and Scrivener. It's designed to be so much more than a grammar checker, with over 25 reports to help you analyze your work on a micro and macro level. One of my favorites is the Echoes report, which helps find words that are repeated in close proximity. This is one of my pet peeves in a lot of my past books because I've had this happen to me so many times where one of those echoes would make it through multiple rounds of edits and eyes all the way to the final draft, and it would drive me nuts. So I was so excited that Proofreading Aid could automatically detect them. Another one I really love is the pronoun check report. With this one, I specifically look at the initial pronoun percentage to see if I'm starting too many sentences with pronouns like I, he, she, etc. Proofreading Aid recommends up to 30% based on published works, so I tried to stay beneath that range. There are so many other features I love as well, such as sensory and sticky sentences reports, so I really recommend trying Proofreading Aid for yourself to see which ones help you the most personally. I also want to share that my experience with the Proofreading Aid team has been amazing. I can really tell how much they value creative writing. A lot of them are writers themselves as well, so they use bank level security to keep everyone's work safe, and they will never use your work to train their algorithms. You can sign up for free to try it out right now, and once you're ready to purchase, my coupon code MEL10 will get you 10% off your yearly premium or premium pro license. I'll have a link to learn more in the description below. After polishing the book as well as I could on my own, the next step was to send draft 4 to my copy editors. The lead editor for Underground Royalty was Katie, who I've been working with at Lost Island Press since I started the publishing house. We actually met in person for the first time last year, which was super cool. And I was also really grateful to have Nyx on board as a secondary editor for Underground Royalty. The two of them together were absolutely lifesavers. They caught so much stuff that I just never could have caught myself. Now, normally during the copy editing process, I will send the entire book to my editors, and then I will wait for them to leave their notes on the entire book and send it back to me, and then I will make my revisions, right? But in this case, I was super tight on the publication deadline, so I actually sent the book out and was making revisions pretty much immediately after they were leaving their comments on the Google Doc. It was a little bit chaotic, but it still got the job done. Whenever I would make changes to the Google Doc during the copy editing process, I would use a color-coded system. So for anything that I revised based on Katie and Nyx's edits, I would put that in red. And anything I added based on their suggestions, for example, Katie mentioning that I should add some more context here and there, I would put that in blue. And then anything that I changed on my own accord without their suggestions or prompting, I would put in orange. I was inspired to do this based on Scrivener's revision mode. However, in Google Docs, they don't have any automatic way of doing this, so I had to manually change the color of the text. It's actually not too time-consuming, and it was definitely worth it because it made the next part of the process a lot easier. And that next step was proofreading. Now, I agree with the consensus that it's not ideal to proofread your book yourself, which is what I did for Underground Royalty. However, in this case, I didn't have the budget to hire a proofreader, and also it was way too close to the publication deadline, so what I ended up doing was I set aside 3 days to completely reread the entire book. It was exhausting and tedious and tiring. However, thanks to the revision colors that I added in, it was actually quite easy because I knew anything that was colored was something relatively new that hasn't been looked over by Katie and Nyx. So they were the ones that were most likely to have typos in them. So I read over the full book and I paid extra close attention to the parts that were in red, orange, and blue. Did I find any typos? Yes, indeed. I found 5 typos over the course of 3 days, and I found 2 inconsistencies. The first was a character who was writing with a pencil, but then later it was described that his ink splattered across the page. And then the second was a character who had her hands in her pockets and then she crossed her arms, which is kind of okay, but it happened so close together that it was kind of weird. So overall, the book was pretty clean and I was happy with the stuff that I caught. Are there typos and inconsistencies that still exist that I didn't catch in my final read? Potentially, maybe, no matter how hard you try or who you hire, sometimes stuff just gets through to the end of the process. However, if in the current version there are a couple of typos here and there, they've already gotten through multiple sets of eyes, so I doubt it will disrupt the reader experience, and I'm very happy with how polished the book has turned out to be. So that is it. Those are the 5 steps I went through to take Underground Royalty from Draft 1 to the final Draft 5, which is now scheduled for release next week. To summarize, here's an even more detailed breakdown in case you want to follow a similar editing structure. After Draft 1, I took a 1-week break, read the entire draft to make a list of definite changes and potential changes, and implemented my selected revisions one at a time. Next, I gathered beta reader feedback on Draft 2, created a list of problems and solutions, and implemented fixes one at a time. Then, I self-polished the writing of Draft 3 with help from Proofreading Aid. And finally, I gathered feedback from editors on Draft 4, implemented their changes using a color-coded system, and performed a final proofread of Draft 5 in 3 days. If you found this helpful, which I hope you did, you can leave a free tip by giving this video a like, and also feel free to comment down below if there are any steps you would like me to dive into with more depth in a dedicated video. I would be happy to do that. Anyways, I will see you in the next video, but until then, get lost.